Under the humid summer afternoon of Newark, Ohio in 2006, the last rays of sunlight slithered through the rows of trees on Maple Run, casting long shadows across the hot asphalt. A light breeze carried the scent of dry grass and the distant sound of children playing. But on that quiet little corner, just a few houses down from the Rowans, there was an unusual stillness, a moment when the fate of a 5-year-old child was about to take a turn no one could have foreseen. Harper Rowan left home with her familiar doll, walking a route that was only a few minutes on foot, and vanished like a burst bubble before anyone realized something terrible was happening. From the Rowans' backyard, her mother called over the fence. The echo came back hollow and chilling. An old pickup truck that had been glimpsed briefly, a strange figure half hidden in the fading light, and a scrap of floral fabric that would lie undiscovered for years. Those tiny clues would become Newark's obsession for the next decade and a half. What seemed like a simple missing child case quickly slipped beyond all investigative logic, swallowed by rumors, mistakes, and nameless fears. When the search grew cold, Harper's file was shoved into the icy drawer of the cold case unit, bearing only a short note: missing, cause undetermined. But in Ohio, the truth refuses to stay buried. Years later, a man walked into the police station with trembling hands and a heavy past. He carried memories of the woods, an old pickup truck, and a secret that had kept him silent his entire childhood. His confession not only reopened Harper's case, but dragged a chain of hidden truths into the open, forcing the community to face the darkness, living right in the heart of their supposedly safe neighborhood. And when investigators finally pieced those fragments together, what broke Newark wasn't the appearance of some nameless drifter. It was the identity of the man who had lived among them all along, right beside the very road Harper walked that final afternoon. Tonight we're going back to the summer of 2006, following Harper Rowan's last journey and watching how the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way back to the light. Before we dive into the shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love journeys in search of forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Early summer afternoon in 2006, Newark, Ohio. The atmosphere on Maple Run still carried its familiar calm. The slow roll of cars down the narrow street, the smell of freshly cut grass drifting in the breeze, brightly painted houses lined up under the lingering end-of-day sun. The Rowan family lived at the end of the block, a tidy, cozy 2-story cream-colored house. Inside, Evelyn Rowan was preparing dinner while Mark had just come in from the garage after putting away some gardening tools. At the center of all that quiet normality was 5-year-old Harper Lee Rowan, with her lopsided ponytail and the pale pink t-shirt she loved. Harper was a friendly, curious, outgoing kid who confidently ran out to the front yard whenever she was allowed to visit friends in the neighborhood. That afternoon, Harper excitedly asked permission to go to a friend's house just a few doors down. For the Rowans, it was completely routine and safe. The road was on the same block where everyone knew each other and kids constantly went back and forth. Evelyn told her to be home before dark. Harper nodded, then skipped down the front steps carrying a small toy. The last image of her was a tiny figure on the tree-shaded sidewalk, sunlight glinting off her green hair clip, making her stand out against the fading afternoon. Time passed faster than usual while Evelyn was busy in the kitchen, and Mark was fixing a faucet out back. When Evelyn glanced at the clock and saw the sky had turned deep orange, she called out the front door to see if Harper was on her way home. No answer, no familiar patter of little feet. Evelyn figured she was probably still playing, so she decided to walk over to the friend's house to pick her up. But when the door opened and the other parent simply said Harper had never come over that day, Evelyn froze for a few seconds, unable to process what she'd just heard. Mark immediately left the house. The couple split up and started knocking on every door in the neighborhood. A few neighbors said they'd seen Harper when she first left home, but no one had seen her after that. The road Harper usually took wasn't far, just a couple hundred steps, yet now it was completely empty. They searched yards, bushes, the small park nearby, calling Harper's name over and over, but there was no response. The last light of the day faded, turning the scene heavy and indescribably uneasy. When Evelyn returned to the front yard, eyes red and hands shaking with worry, and Mark tried to stay calm, but was clearly pale, both understood this was no longer just a kid staying out too late. They had checked every place they possibly could, asked everyone who should have seen Harper, and when not a single trace appeared, no voice, no glimpse, no clue, the greatest fear a family can have began to take shape. Mark pulled out his phone, hand trembling slightly. Evelyn stood behind him, voice already catching, though she hadn't spoken. He dialed 911. Officer Raymond Locke, on desk duty that day, reached for the receiver with the calm focus of any afternoon shift, ready for anything. But within seconds of hearing Mark Rowan's trembling yet controlled voice, Locke's demeanor changed instantly. He switched straight into emergency reporting mode. Missing child. 5 years old. Left home to play, hasn't returned. No hesitation for kids under 10, especially past their usual return time. Every minute can be life or death. Locke pushed the report into the priority system and alerted the nearest patrol unit. Outside the window, the late afternoon light was turning coppery, but night hadn't fallen yet. This was the most dangerous window in child abductions. Dark enough to limit visibility, yet light enough for a suspect to leave the area without drawing attention. Locke knew it well as he hit the internal alarm. Minutes later, Officer Riley Denton's cruiser turned onto Maple Run Drive. Headlights reflected off front lawns, bright painted porches, and the anxious faces of neighbors already gathering. It wasn't fully dark yet, but the light was weak, creating a half-day, half-night atmosphere that made the unease seep into every detail. Mark and Evelyn stood in front of their house, clearly exhausted after hours of fruitless searching. Denton approached and asked them to recount everything when Harper left, where she was headed, her usual habits, and most importantly, the exact moment they knew for sure she wasn't just playing longer than usual. As soon as the situation was confirmed, Denton radioed for more units. A second and third patrol car arrived quickly. Officers spread out to gather information while Detective Mara Ellison, experienced with cases involving young children, was dispatched from headquarters. By the time Mara arrived, light was only glinting off the treetops. The street was dim but not yet swallowed by darkness. This was the exact window the team had to maximize for visible evidence. Mara brought the Rowan family inside the living room for a fuller statement. Evelyn repeated that Harper had taken the usual route and had never wandered off on her own. Mark explained how they'd searched the entire neighborhood, but no one had seen Harper after she stepped off their front yard. Mara took meticulous notes, mentally sequencing every event. Every passing minute lowered the odds of finding Harper locally, forcing her to decide the next steps fast. Outside, officers began sweeping the route Harper was supposed to take. Maple Run Drive was a quiet street with houses set back from the road. That very quiet now became a liability. No cameras or footage of Harper's walk. Officers went door to door asking if anyone had seen the child or heard anything unusual. A few neighbors vaguely remembered seeing Harper leave home, but no one could pin down exact times. The vagueness told Mara that if someone had approached Harper, it happened fast and unnoticed. A second team was assigned to check places kids frequent: open backyards, the mini park at the end of the block, narrow paths between houses, spots a child might wander into or hide while playing. They used flashlights even though natural light lingered, because shadows under porches or beneath trees could hide small traces. But everything was empty. No Harper, no sounds, no unexpected object. When that team returned, new information reached Mara from a couple living near the corner. Around the time Harper left, they saw an old pickup truck moving slowly down Maple Run. The truck didn't belong to anyone in the neighborhood. They couldn't recall the plate but were certain about the outdated model and its unusually slow speed. And that truck appeared at the exact window when Harper vanished from everyone's sight. Mara immediately ordered a sweep of the truck's likely escape route. Officers were sent down the narrow lanes connecting the subdivision to the main road north. If the pickup turned that way, it could be gone in under a minute, too fast for neighbors to realize anything was wrong. They looked for fresh tire marks, skid traces, anything suggesting the vehicle had stopped briefly. As reports came back, the picture sharpened. Harper had not left the area voluntarily. She was not lost in a backyard or park. She never reached her friend's house. There were no signs she had run away, and the pickup sighting strongly supported the possibility that someone had taken her off Maple Run Drive in a very short window. By now it was full late evening. Darkness was advancing but hadn't blanketed the neighborhood yet. Flashlights flicked on more frequently. Patrol lights bounced off bright-colored walls. Inside the Rowan living room, Mara delivered the investigation's first official assessment. This was not a lost child, and the possibility that Harper had been removed from the area by a stranger was something police could not ignore. When Detective Mara Ellison reported the initial scene findings to the chief, support arrived faster than expected. The roar of specialty vehicles, the crackle of radios, the hurried footsteps on pavement echoed across Maple Run Drive. The once quiet street now the center of an urgent manhunt. The Licking County K-9 team arrived first. Handler Beck and police dog Ludo started in the Rowan yard with a shirt Evelyn provided. Ludo reacted quickly, sniffing hard and pulling his handler east toward the greener, more wooded edge of Maple Run. That told Mara instantly Harper had not gone toward her friend's house. She had gone the opposite direction. Voluntarily or led, no one knew yet. Wasting no time, Mara deployed ground search teams in two prongs, one following Ludo's trail, the other forming a line across the entire length of Maple Run, checking every inch of ground, every wall crevice, every Newark Fire and Rescue joined with high-powered lights in case the search stretched into night. Residents began gathering, many offering help, but police kept them outside the perimeter to preserve evidence. As the K-9 team moved 2 blocks beyond the residential area, natural light was nearly gone. Ahead lay the edge of an open strip of woods, a small forest that connected to abandoned land behind it, rarely visited. Not the kind of place a 5-year-old walks into alone. Mara immediately set a 300-meter search radius around the woods entrance. Less than 20 minutes later, a ground team member shouted, voice tense with a mix of dread and hope. Mara and 2 officers ran over. At the wood's edge, beneath tall grass, lay a small pale green object, a plastic hair clip. Evelyn had described this exact clip in her statement. Harper always wore it because it's the color of the sky. Now it lay hidden in the grass, as if dropped while someone carried her, or while she struggled. The team stood around the evidence in heavy silence for a few seconds. Forensic technicians were called immediately to collect and bag it properly. No one was allowed to touch it. For a 5-year-old, finding a personal item like this is never a good sign. It wasn't something a child casually drops on her usual route. It was too deep off the path, too close to an area no normal kid would enter. Mara instantly revised the working theory. If Harper was brought here, the perpetrator either knew the terrain well, or frequented the area. Such people usually live nearby or have regular reasons to be around Maple Run without being permanent residents. As teams shone flashlights deeper into the woods, Ludo pulled hard again, indicating Harper had been taken inside. But with darkness falling, and the risk of destroying evidence overnight, the commander decided to secure only the wood's edge that night and resume a full push at dawn with better light and more manpower. While teams mapped the terrain, Detective Mara began pulling records of any registered offenders nearby, single residents, anyone with a disturbance history, especially those owning an older pickup. The key witness detail. Names surfaced quickly from local databases. A man living 2 blocks away, known for moving his parking spot often and once accused of child harassment years earlier. An auto mechanic near the road to the woods who owned a gray older model pickup. A reclusive neighbor with a violent past and irregular work. Mara noted each one and ordered verification of their whereabouts when Harper vanished. The focus now: who among them could have passed through Maple Run in that exact window without raising suspicion? As the search teams packed up after the first evening sweep, Harper's hair clip became the first real clue, and the clearest proof she had not sat on her own. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood. This trace was likely the start of a long high-stakes journey, with no room for error. The search was no longer vague hope. It had become a race against time. The evening search ended with the discovery of Harper's hair clip, making Detective Mara Ellison realize that every subsequent minute had to be used to the fullest. When dawn broke the next day and the search team prepared to push deeper into the forest, Mara returned to the temporary command center in the Rowan family's garage to begin screening suspects, an essential step to determine whether the threat came from inside the community or from a stranger outside the area. The initial list had 3 names, but the 2 that stood out most were Tristan Cole and Gideon Hale, both of whom lived near the open forest edge and had previously been reported by residents for behavior the community considered not normal. Tristan Cole was processed first. He lived alone in a house not far from the forest's edge, kept to himself, rarely appeared in public, and had been accused by neighbors of habitually watching children at the park. Although those accusations had never been strong enough for police to open a file in the past, Harper's disappearance made Tristan a central focus of the investigation. When Mara and Officer Denton knocked on his door early that morning, Tristan appeared annoyed and still half asleep, but answered questions calmly. He stated that the previous afternoon he had been working at an air conditioning repair shop a few miles away. Not only did he provide a work invoice, he also gave the shop's check-in time and the owner's contact information. When police verified everything, it all checked out perfectly. The shop's security footage showed Tristan present continuously from afternoon until evening, with no opportunity to leave and return without being recorded. One of the employees even clearly described Tristan taking a quick snack break in the storeroom at the exact time the Rowan family reported Harper missing. Every timestamp matched, eliminating Tristan with certainty. The neighbors' rumors now appeared to be nothing more than prejudice against an eccentric loner, not signs of criminality. Tristan was removed from the suspect list. Gideon Hale was a different story. He lived in isolation on the forest's fringe in a dilapidated house with a yard full of scrap. Gideon had no prior violent convictions, but he had been cited for disorderly conduct and neighbor disputes. Most importantly, he owned an old pickup truck, a detail suspiciously matching the vehicle a witness had seen near the time Harper vanished. When Mara approached Gideon, he was grumpy and unfriendly, but did not refuse to cooperate. Gideon insisted the pickup had been broken down and immobile in his garage for the past week. The small garage reeked of oil. The engine was disassembled, and thick dust covered many parts. Everything indicated the truck could not be driven. Mara had the vehicle inspected, recorded the VIN number, and photographed its entire condition. Mara continued cross-checking statement. Gideon said that on the afternoon Harper disappeared, he was repairing his backyard roof, and a friend named Walter Penn had stopped by with some tools. When police located Walter for a statement, he described the roof's condition and the exact time of his visit, matching Gideon's account perfectly. Additionally, no one had seen the pickup leave Gideon's property, and the ground marks inside the garage proved the truck had not moved in days. Gideon's irritable demeanor and odd lifestyle were not enough to constitute evidence. The only clear thing was that he had no involvement in Harper's disappearance. Having eliminated the two most notable suspects, Mara returned to the topographic map and pieced together the entire timeline of events. Harper left the house, no one saw her after the initial short stretch of road. An old pickup appeared, and then vanished, and the only trace, the hair clip, was found at the edge of a forest. No child would enter alone. No one in the community had an open schedule that matched the time Harper went missing. No one had a matching vehicle. No one had a clear motive. No one was recorded near where the trace was found. The neighborhood's suspicious individuals had all now been cleared by concrete evidence and airtight alibi. Mara concluded, the perpetrator was most likely not a local resident, not the eccentric neighbor, not the people the community had previously suspected. The person who took Harper was a stranger, someone who appeared by chance, had the means to leave the area quickly, and knew how to exploit a moment when no one was watching. This opened a broader, vaguer, and far more difficult investigative direction. Instead of looking for the perpetrator within a few blocks, they now had to prepare for the possibility that this was someone who might have already left Newark that same afternoon. After crossing both Tristan and Gideon off the suspect list, Mara wrote only one clear note in her investigation log: perpetrator not part of the community. This is an external act, and that was the scenario any investigator dreaded most, because it meant the chances of finding Harper quickly had dropped dramatically. The police officially clearing Tristan Cole and Gideon Hale from the suspect list plunged Maple Run, and soon the entire town of Newark, into a different kind of unease than the first hours after Harper vanished. If the perpetrator was not someone who lived in the neighborhood, who was? That question spread faster than any official update the police department could control, and as anxiety grew, rumors began to surface, powerful enough to shatter the steady investigative rhythm Mara Ellison was trying to maintain. Once the internal suspect list was wiped clean, residents felt they no longer had a person to watch out for. That made the fear vaguer and deeper. The once peaceful mornings of Newark were now replaced by parents hovering over their children without letting them out of sight. Whispered conversations between neighbors about the unidentified old pickup, and baseless speculation from local online community groups that spread like wildfire across a dry field. The most terrifying thing was not the rumors themselves, but how quickly people believed unverified claims. One person said they heard a scream from the forest edge that night, even though when police followed up, the sound could easily have been children playing in a backyard. Another claimed to have seen a stranger staring at the Rowan house for days prior, but that person's description changed with each retelling, until it no longer matched anything police could use for comparison. Within 24 hours, the police department's hotline received more than 4 times the normal volume of calls. Most were vague tips: saw a stranger in the neighborhood, a car driving slowly down the street, heard strange noises at night, saw footprints near the fence. All of them forced police to divert manpower to check, even though the vast majority were almost certainly products of widespread panic. And then the local media jumped in. Newark Channel 7 was the first to cover the disappearance. They broadcast live from the entrance to Maple Run, with police lights still flashing in the background, opening with a shocking line: "A 5-year-old girl vanished," right in the Fifth residential area of Newark. That headline spread across the city in under an hour. Online news sites began posting at a dizzying pace, some including theories no investigator had ever confirmed. One local paper even ran a full analysis titled "Old Pickup: The Key to a Past Series of Incidents," despite zero evidence that any such series existed. Residents, swept up in the information vortex, started acting on instinct. They installed extra cameras, changed locks, and warned their kids not to step outside even for a minute. Some panicked families called demanding police search every bush and abandoned building nearby. Every action was driven by fear, but it also cost investigators countless hours that could have been spent on real leads. The strongest rumors came from local social media. Harper may have been taken out of state. The perpetrator might be someone spotted in Maple Run last week. Adult footprints found in the forest. Police are hiding information. All false, but falsehood did not slow the spread. And the more it spread, the more people called to ask, to verify, to demand explanations. The Newark Police Department eventually had to set up a dedicated hotline just for Harper-related tips to separate truth from fiction. Detective Mara Ellison saw the damage immediately. While the team pursued the old pickup based on the witness description, they received 3 separate calls about 3 completely different vehicles, none of which matched, and all belonging to local residents who had simply parked in the wrong spot. A group of volunteers entered the forest to search without permission, accidentally trampling potential evidence the crime scene team had not yet processed. Someone even showed up at the Rowan house asking outright, "Is someone in the family hiding something?" nearly breaking Evelyn under the pressure. Newark had always been a small, slow-paced, gentle town, where most people believed these things only happened somewhere else. Now for the first time they faced the possibility that a child abductor had walked down their street, and no one knew who he was, where he came from, or where he was now. No clear leads, no direct witnesses, no sign the child was still near. The only concrete thing police had was the tiny hair clip lying in the grass. As dusk fell over Maple Run on the second day since Harper disappeared, a heavy atmosphere blanketed the entire neighborhood. Every resident looked around with unprecedented wariness. And in the temporary office, Mara had to add to her report. Social pressure rising sharply, rumors disrupting the investigation. The town is descending into anxiety. No real leads had surfaced. No signs of progress. Only fear spreading faster than the truth. Even though police had cleared Tristan Cole with an airtight alibi, that was not enough to extinguish the rumors that had already spread throughout the community since Harper vanished. And as is common in cases that send the public into panic, the truth always lags behind fear. And fear always picks the easiest target to blame, the person they suspected from the start. So when media continued referring to the initial suspect who was questioned, many Newark residents did not care what the official conclusion was. They trusted their gut more than the investigation's result. Just one day after police confirmed Tristan's innocence, social media posts began claiming police might be covering something up. An anonymous account insisted they saw Tristan going into the forest that day, even though security footage proved he was miles away at the shop. Someone else wrote, "No one's looking up to see how suspicious he really is." Those baseless comments garnered dozens of shares, and soon hundreds of others began treating Tristan as the unofficial perpetrator, regardless of the clear fact. The Cole family became the center of stigma in a matter of hours. Tristan's mother, Lorraine, 68, who lived a few streets away, received wary glances every time she went to the store. Some neighbors avoided eye contact or closed their gates early when they saw her outside. They never said anything directly, but their guarded expressions told her they now saw her son as a dark shadow over the entire neighborhood. Worse, a group of Maple Run parents told each other they wouldn't let their kids walk past Tristan's house anymore. Even though he had been proven uninvolved, his home was still viewed by many as an invisible danger zone. Tristan had always kept to himself, but now even stepping out to get the mail subjected him to cold stares from neighbors. The rumors even led to more extreme action. On the evening of the third day after Harper's disappearance, someone threw a note into Tristan's yard that read in scrawled letters, "We know what you did." The following night a loud bang echoed against his parked car. Someone had thrown a rock, denting the door. Tristan called the police, but all they could do was file a report. The culprit had vanished into the dark. Detective Mara Ellison knew exactly what was happening. She visited Tristan one late afternoon to check on him and warn him to stay alert. But standing on his porch, looking into his tired, stressed eyes, Mara felt the heavy injustice weighing on an innocent man. He said only one thing: they don't need the truth, they just need someone to dump their fear on. The Cole family was mercilessly swept into the court of public opinion. Tristan's sister, who lived in the neighboring state, received anonymous messages telling her family should be ashamed. One of her co-workers even asked bluntly, "Does your family have a history of mental illness?" based entirely on speculation with zero basis. Meanwhile, the police department tried to release more information to clarify that Tristan had been cleared. They held a press conference explaining the alibi verification process. Sadly, the number of people who watched that press conference was less than half the number who had read and shared the false social media posts. Because in a state of panic, what fits people's fears always spreads faster than what fits logic. Some local reporters exploited sensational angles for clicks. One news channel ran the headline, "Eccentric man, once suspected, did police miss something?" even though the story itself admitted Tristan had an alibi. For many viewers, reading the headline alone was enough to rekindle suspicion. And so, despite doing nothing wrong and cooperating fully, Tristan and his family were pushed into a position they could not escape, becoming the symbol of the community's fear. They were a textbook example of how, in the most tense moments, people easily target the nearest person, rather than face the possibility that the perpetrator could be someone they had never met. Newark had always been a peaceful city where everyone knew each other and serious crime was rare. But precisely because of that, when tragedy struck, they didn't know where to redirect their suspicion. And in that panic, they created a lasting mistake, one that hurt completely innocent people. Detective Mara wrote the concluding line in her internal report: "Public opinion is heading in the wrong direction. Rumors are disrupting the investigation process. Consequences directly affecting the Cole family." And that was one of the most painful chapters in the Harper Rowan case. A chapter that not only etched the disappearance of a child deeper, but also exposed how a community can destroy itself when fear overpowers the truth. Misguided public pressure did nothing to help the investigation, and the harshest reality by the end of 2006 was that Newark police were still unable to make any further progress after clearing the internal suspects. Expanded searches around the woods, sweeps of nearby neighborhoods, and routes leading out of the city, all of it yielded no new leads. And when winter settled over Ohio, any traces that might have revealed Harper's final journey were gradually erased by time and weather. In early 2007, after nearly 6 months with no progress, the Harper Rowan case was officially moved to pending status, awaiting new information. That sounded mild, but to investigators who knew the game, pending usually meant there's nothing left to do, yet no one was ready to let go. The Newark Police Department kept the case prioritized, but manpower was redirected to newer incidents in the city. By mid-2007, after dozens of interviews, wide area checks, more than 100 tips from the public, and multiple fruitless searches, the case was recommended for transfer to the Licking County Cold Case Unit. When a missing person file has been stalled long enough, that's the only way to keep hope alive without draining the entire local force. In 2008, Detective Sean Rourke, who had experience with cases that dragged on for years, officially took over the Harper Rowan file. Sean was 37 at the time, calm, quiet, but extremely thorough. Colleagues jokingly called him the guy who picks up the pieces time leaves behind. He hadn't been part of the initial missing person hours, but the moment he held every document, every diagram, every report from Mara Ellison, he immediately felt the weight of it. Taking on a cold case isn't just reopening an old folder. It's the process of bringing a story that went silent years ago back to life, from evidence and statements, to the very atmosphere of the moment it happened. Sean followed the exact procedure he always used with cold cases: re-archive everything to current standards, digitizing reports, interviews, maps, wrote diagrams, and the directions that had previously failed. Reread statements chronologically, looking for anything missed, simply because information was lacking at the time. Re-examine all physical evidence, though it was scant: the hair clip, the forest map, crime scene photos, a few soil traces that couldn't be analyzed. Review the list of older pickup trucks known to be within a 50-mile radius at the time. Cross-check every anonymous tip and vague witness. He wrote in his very first note, "No internal perpetrator. The case depends 100% on external leads. That makes it many times hard." The following year, 2009, Sean tried reopening the original lines of inquiry. He recontacted some witnesses, even tracked down people who had moved away from Maple Run. Some remembered more clearly, some had forgotten almost everything, but no one gave him what he needed: a detail that could be verified with physical evidence or an eyewitness account. When trace processing technology began to improve in the early 2010s, Sean submitted requests to retest the hair clip and the soil samples from the forest edge. The results were the same as in 2006: no foreign DNA, no fingerprints, nothing that produced a breakthrough. Over those 10 years, whenever a similar case popped up in neighboring states, Sean compared files, offender behavior, movement patterns. But Harper didn't fit any series. No pattern, no similarities, no signs of a repeat offender. The only hypothesis still standing was, this was the act of a stranger who appeared in Newark exactly once, and then vanished. Most of the tips Sean received during that period only wasted hours for him and the cold case team. People claiming "I saw the little girl at the supermarket," emails insisting Harper is in another state, or paranoid callers phoning in the middle of the night saying, "The kidnapper is following me." None led anywhere. In 2014, a man in Indiana sent an anonymous letter claiming to know where Harper was being held. Sean drove across state lines to check it out, only to discover the sender was a psychiatric patient living in a nursing home. In 2017, a former inmate claimed he'd heard someone bragging about grabbing a little girl in Ohio. A 4-month investigation revealed the guy was just making it up for a reduced sentence. In 2019, Sean wrote in his year-end summary, 13 years have passed, not a single lead has risen above the level of false report. The Harper Rowan case remained exactly where it was in the cold case cabinet, carefully sealed and specially marked, because it involved a minor. An unusually thin file for the length of time it had been open, because every line of inquiry looped back to the starting point: a child vanished in broad daylight from a safe neighborhood. No witnesses, no cameras, no signs of struggle, no suspicious person. For more than a decade, Harper's case lingered like a ghost in the community's memory, surfacing in conversations whenever a child went missing elsewhere, then sinking back into silence as if it had never existed. But for Detective Sean Rourke, the 2006 little girl file had never truly gone cold. It was simply waiting for something that hadn't appeared in 13 years. A new piece, no matter how small. 2019 closed with another ice-cold report from Detective Sean Rourke. 13 years, no viable leads. He put the Harper Rowan file back in its familiar spot in the cold case cabinet and walked out of the room with the familiar heavy helplessness. He had no idea that just a few months later, that door would open in a way no one saw coming. Not because of technology, not because of new DNA, but because of a confession from someone named Braddock. In early March 2020, on a gray morning, the Licking County Sheriff's Office duty desk took a strange call. A young man, voice slightly hoarse and hesitant, said he needed to talk to someone about something that happened a long time ago, involving children. The duty officer was used to every kind of call, from petty thefts to delusional people, but something about the way this man paused, took a deep breath, yet still insisted on speaking to an investigator made him take extra careful notes. The man left his name, Jonah Braddock. That afternoon Jonah showed up at headquarters, looking younger than his voice suggested, early 30s. His eyes weren't exactly those of someone on the run, they were the eyes of someone who had been running for so long he was too exhausted to keep going. Sean Rourke was called down to the interview room, initially thinking this might be a statement for a different case. He wasn't expecting anything related to Harper, but Jonah's very first sentence made him sit up straight. "I came to talk about my father," Jonah said, fingers laced together, squeezing tight, "about what he did, to me, and to other kids." Jonah told his story haltingly, with difficulty, that he grew up in a small house on the outskirts of Newark, with his father, Silas Braddock, a rough man, unemployed more often than not, a heavy drinker who controlled everything in the house with silence and rage. From a very early age, Jonah had been a victim of violence and abuse, but what had kept him from sleeping all these years wasn't just what happened to him, it was how Silas used him as part of something far worse. "He made me talk to the kids in the neighborhood," Jonah said, voice shaking. "Told me to invite them to play, to talk to them so they'd think he was a nice guy, a friendly neighbor. I didn't understand everything, but I knew something was wrong, very wrong." Sean listened, hands still on the table, not interrupting. He had heard many painful stories, but he still sensed a special layer of horror in Jonah's voice, the horror of a child who was both victim and forced accomplice. Then Jonah mentioned 2006, and the name Newark made Sean briefly stop breathing. "I think what I need to talk about is that day," Jonah whispered. "I don't remember the exact date, but I remember it was summer. I was about 14. He was driving the old pickup, the green one that was almost completely rusted. We didn't take the usual roads. We went around to a newer neighborhood with brightly painted houses and freshly planted lawns. I remember it clearly, there were kids' bikes in the front yards. Newark, new neighborhood, old pickup pieces started clicking together in Sean's head. He opened his notebook, but instead of writing just stared at Jonah, waiting for the next sentence. Jonah said that day, Silas parked a short distance from an intersection, told Jonah to stay in the truck and not get out. A little while later he walked off, disappearing behind a white fence that ran along the road. Jonah didn't see what he did, only heard other cars passing and kids laughing somewhere. Then he came back. Not long after, Jonah took a deep breath. But there was a little girl in the truck. She was sitting up front between us. Really small, maybe 5, brown, slightly curly hair. She was wearing a pink top with a square neckline and glasses, unusual color, not black, but like pale blue, almost like candy. I still remember how she looked at me, so confused. Sean's heart pounded. Pink top, pale blue candy-colored glasses. The description matched almost perfectly what the Rowan family had said in two. He kept his composure and asked if Jonah heard the girl say anything. Jonah shook his head. "She just asked me, 'Where are we going?' My dad said he was taking her home, that her parents were waiting." But his voice, I knew he was lying. I'd lived with him long enough to hear it. The pickup left the neighborhood and headed toward the edge of town. Jonah said his father avoided main roads and took a narrow dirt track through thick trees Jonah had never been on before. Eventually the truck stopped in a clearing in the woods, not the forest edge the search teams had scoured, but deeper in near a dry creek bed. He told me to get out and stand back. I knew better than to argue. Jonah said, eyes drifting as if watching the scene again. I remember standing at the tree line, not daring to look straight. The little girl was crying, but quietly, her voice choking. He dragged her deeper. I just wanted to disappear. A while later, he came back alone. Sean asked if Jonah ever saw the girl again. The answer was no. They drove home in silence, as if that whole trip had never happened. That night Silas got blackout drunk as usual, and never mentioned what happened in the woods again. But Jonah never forgot. As he grew older, the memory became clearer and more terrifying, especially when he read about missing children. I started therapy a few years ago, Jonah said, his voice slowing. The therapist asked about my worst memories. The forest scene always came back. Recently, I saw an article about a little girl who disappeared in Newark in pink top, pale blue glasses. I knew it was the same girl. Sean asked Jonah for the exact location where Silas had stopped. Jonah couldn't remember street names, but he remembered the direction, landmarks, old signs, a closed gas station, a small bridge. He drew a map from memory, hesitantly but consistently, enough for Sean to pinpoint a wooded area farther from Maple Run than the original two. When the interview ended, Sean stood up, the familiar heaviness replaced by something else, a sharp, awake tension he only felt when he knew he had just touched something real. He pulled the Harper Rowan file from the cabinet for the how manyth time he no longer remembered. But this time something completely new lay among the old pages, the name Silas Braddock, and the account of a child from back then, who was now a man, deciding he would no longer stay silent. After 14 years, the investigation was officially reopened, and this time it had a concrete direction. The information Jonah provided instantly made Silas Braddock the focus. When Sean Rourke pulled up residency records, the very first result stopped him cold. In 2006, Silas had lived in a rental house just 3 blocks from Maple Run. That location was close enough to access the road Harper walked, yet far enough that Maple Run residents never considered him one of theirs. It was a disturbing match, because it explained why Silas's name had never appeared on any police questionnaire that year. When Sean checked vehicle records, another piece snapped into place. Silas owned an old green Chevrolet pickup with a history of reported engine trouble. Exactly the type of truck witnesses had seen the afternoon Harper vanished. The pickup disappeared from records in 2007, but at the time of the crime it was fully operational. Sean flagged that match immediately. Silas's criminal record wasn't thick, but it painted a consistent picture of someone prone to serious trouble. One domestic violence call that never went to trial, one drunken disorderly arrest, and scattered neighbor complaints about him yelling at his son in the middle of the night. None rose to the level of a criminal case, but together they matched exactly what Jonah had described: a short-tempered, out-of-control man who kept to himself and moved frequently. In medical records, Sean found notes from an alcohol treatment program Silas had started but never finished. The doctor's comments were clear: explosive temperament, resistant to direction, aggressive tendencies. That further confirmed Jonah wasn't just recounting trauma, he was accurately describing his father's dangerous behavior. When Sean cross-referenced community reports from every place Silas had lived, small complaints surfaced: kids feeling uncomfortable walking past his house, one boy approached oddly, occasional sounds of heavy objects being thrown in the backyard. Each item was too minor to be evidence on its own, but placed beside Jonah's account, they suddenly became meaningful pieces. One detail especially caught Sean's attention. Silas moved out of the address near Maple Run just a few months after Harper disappeared. He left quickly, without a forwarding address or responding to any mail. After that he bounced between states, changing jobs constantly. That erratic movement pattern fit perfectly with someone trying to put distance between himself and a crime scene. So why had no one on the 2006 team ever mentioned Silas? The reason was heartbreakingly simple: Silas kept completely to himself, never interacted, never participated in the community, and had only lived there a short time. When police went door to door asking, "Did you see anyone strange around here?" no one mentioned him. The person who is rarely seen is the easiest to overlook in a wide-net investigation. Witnesses only saw the pickup, not the driver's face. Neighbors didn't know Silas had a son or where he worked. His house was on a side street, not on the direct canvas route. All those gaps made him invisible in the original investigation. Not because he was clean, but because every sign was faint exactly when police needed clarity most. Sean wrote a short line in the updated file that was powerful enough to turn the entire case around. Silas Braddock, primary suspect, and for the first time in over 14 years, the Harper Rowan investigation finally had clarity. A name, a history, a matching account, a new starting point. Identifying Silas Braddock as the prime suspect led Sean Rourke to zero in on the single most critical detail in Jonah's statement: the patch of forest where the pickup had stopped on the day Harper vanished. Jonah couldn't recall the road name, but he described the direction of travel, distinctive turns, a small wooden bridge, and an old gas station the two of them had passed. When Sean plotted those landmarks on a map, a sparsely wooded area emerged. deeper in than the 2006 search teams had ever swept, a location entirely plausible to have been overlooked because it fell outside the original search radius. The next morning, Sean brought in the Licking County forensics team and specialized vehicles to the spot Jonah had pinpointed. A light rain the night before had left the ground damp. The smell of rotting wood and forest soil hung in the air, but the team had little trouble locating the exact place. A shallow depression between two rows of old trees, set apart from any animal trails. Jonah had once called it a clearing just big enough for a truck to pull over, and that was exactly what it was. Any tire tracks from 2006 had long been erased by time, but the terrain itself remained unchanged. The forensics team began a concentric spiral search. Metal detectors, blue light lamps, ground probes, and evidence bags were spread out across the wet surface. They worked centimeter by centimeter because after 14 years, anything still left behind could be a crucial piece, even if it no longer carried strong legal weight. About an hour in, a technician waved Sean over. Beneath a thin layer of soil, they had uncovered a length of thin, rotted parachute cord tangled among tree roots. Nearby lay a small scrap of fabric, its color so faded it was impossible to identify, yet the material suggested it had once belonged to a child's garment. A few steps away they found a cracked piece of plastic that might have come from a toy or personal item. These tiny discoveries were not enough to prove anything conclusive, but looking at them, Sean felt one thing with absolute certainty: Jonah had not invented this memory. No one could describe a forest location with such precision and point to the exact spot where a truck had once stopped, unless they had actually been there. The decayed items could not confirm a victim's identity, but they convinced Sean that this was indeed the place Silas had brought Jonah in the summer of 2000. The forensics team widened and deepened the excavation. They recovered a few corroded metal fragments, a short length of electrical wire, and a piece of blackened plastic that appeared burned. None of it could be definitively tied to Harper, yet everything matched Jonah's account of Silas dragging the little girl deeper into the woods while leaving him to wait at the tree line. The technicians conducted a preliminary on-site analysis and agreed the degree of decay indicated the items had likely been there for well over a decade. Nothing was recent. There were no signs of anyone having passed through lately, a truly forgotten place. Though the findings yielded no legally conclusive evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints, no biological traces, Sean felt the investigative path brighten considerably. If this was where Silas had stopped the truck, then Jonah's claim about the little girl accompanying them was highly likely true. And if that little girl was Harper Rowan, the impact of this discovery could turn the entire case upside down. Still, Sean knew it was not yet enough to arrest Silas. The fragments only proved human activity in the area around 2006. They did not establish motive, action, or the victim's identity, but they were sufficient to push the investigation forward in a completely new direction. Full focus on Silas's behavior while living near Maple Run and tracing his movements after Harper's disappearance. As the team packed up the scene, Sean wrote in his report, "Not enough to charge, enough to believe Jonah, enough to keep chasing Silas." For a case that had stood still for nearly 15 years, that alone was genuine progress. The remnants found in the forest, Jonah described, convinced Sean Rourke he was on the right track, but to pin down Silas Braddock's actions in 2006 more firmly, he needed corroboration from the people who had lived with him. The first person Sean approached was Genevieve Braddock, Jonah's biological mother and Silas's ex-wife. If Jonah was telling the truth, Genevieve surely knew at least part of the picture, or at the very least, what had gone on inside the Braddock household back then. Genevieve lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of Columbus, about an hour's drive from Newark. When Sean arrived, she opened the door cautiously, not entirely surprised to hear her son's name, but visibly on guard the moment Silas was mentioned. Her apartment was tidy yet cold, the kind of place someone lived in simply because they had no other choice. When Sean began laying out Jonah's statements, the abuse by Silas, being forced to approach young children, and especially the events of 2006, Genevieve reacted instantly. She let out a sharp breath, almost a weary laugh, and shook her head. She insisted Jonah had an active imagination, that his childhood memories were unreliable, and that Silas would never harm children. It wasn't the answer Sean had expected, but it also wasn't one he hadn't seen before. Many parents in violent households choose denial, either to protect themselves, or because they are too terrified to face the truth. When Sean pressed about 2006, Genevieve, she said Silas back then was just an unemployed man, with a bad temper, but would never touch a child. Sean recognized the familiar shield she was raising, an image harmless enough to hide the things no one wanted to talk about. Yet the longer they spoke, the more contradictions surfaced. Genevieve mentioned that Silas would often disappear from the house for hours without explanation, that he kept Jonah extremely close and wouldn't let the boy play with anyone else. She even let slip that neighbors had once called the police about shouting, but she always brushed it off because family business shouldn't involve outsiders. Sean listened, took notes, and quietly realized everything Genevieve denied with words, she confirmed with details. The Braddock family file was anything but simple. As Sean dug deeper into old records, a pattern emerged clearly: a domestic disturbance call in 1998, teacher reports of Jonah showing up to school with unexplained bruises, and especially Silas's sudden moves, always shortly after neighbors started noticing suspicious behavior. The Braddocks' isolation became a key factor. They didn't talk to neighbors. They didn't participate in community events. They had no friends. No one knew what happened behind their doors, and no one was close enough to ask. That reclusiveness formed a perfect shell for Silas, a man who could do wrong without anyone around him noticing or having enough information to report. Sean returned to speak with Genevieve twice more. Each time she stuck to her line that Jonah was imagining things, even suggesting her son wanted to blame the past on someone to make life easier. But what struck Sean most was the tension in her eyes whenever he mentioned Harper Rowan's name. She didn't ask who Harper was. She didn't ask what had happened to the girl. She immediately said, Silas couldn't be involved. A reaction too fast, too defensive, almost involuntary. From years of investigative experience, Sean knew that kind of response rarely came from belief. It came from fear of the truth. The more he compared Jonah's account with the records, and Genevieve's statements, the clearer one reality became. The Braddock household had operated under a system of concealed violence, long enough for Jonah to carry it through childhood, and airtight enough that the community never noticed. And within that environment, Silas had every condition he needed to commit crimes without suspicion. Leaving Genevieve's apartment, Sean wrote succinctly yet heavily in his report, the mother's denials do not clear Silas. On the contrary, they reinforce the pattern of concealment and control within the family. With that note, the last question mark in Silas Braddock's file began to sharpen into a clear outline. And the Harper Rowan case after 14 years was moving closer to a truth that had never been named. The contradictions in Genevieve Braddock's denials convinced Sean Rourke that many more pieces of Silas's past remained hidden. And just as he suspected, information began to surface once the police quietly reviewed Silas's residential history. Only days after meeting Genevieve, Sean received a call from a woman named Maribel Grant, who said she wanted to tell something she should have told a long time ago. Her voice trembled but was resolute, and she insisted on meeting in person rather than over the phone. When Sean met Maribel at the office, she sat on the edge of her chair clutching her purse, eyes constantly flicking toward the door. She was in her late 40s, yet something in her demeanor made her seem older, not from age, but from the weight of memory. Sean didn't rush her. He recognized the signs, someone steeling themselves to unearth a past they had buried deep. When Maribel finally spoke, Sean understood her hesitation. She explained that when she was about 8 or 9, her family had lived near a man named Silas Braddock. The name immediately sharpened Sean's focus. At first Silas seemed friendly, often working on his car in the driveway and waving to the kids as they passed. But after a few weeks, that friendliness turned into excessive attention. Maribel said Silas would call her over asking if she wanted to see new toys in the garage or to hold something he was fixing. When she avoided him, he would get angry but try to stay calm. Once he reached out and touched her shoulder, stroking down her arm in a way that made her shrink back instantly. When she told her mother, the family moved not long afterward. They never reported it to police. They just wanted to get away from the man. When Sean asked how she could be certain it was Silas, Maribel said something that sent a chill down his spine. I don't remember his face, but I remember the eyes. Jonah got it exactly right. Those eyes looked straight through you. She went on to say that years later, as an adult, she heard Silas had moved from state to state, always living alone and keeping to himself. just like the pattern Sean had already identified in the residence record. When Jonah appeared in the news with testimony linked to the Harper case, Marable instantly recognized the description of Silas as the same man who had turned part of her childhood into a haunting memory. Every detail Marable recounted about Silas's behavior matched Jonah's account, the way he approached children with unnatural friendliness, how his expression could flip in an instant if a child resisted, and especially how he looked for chances to lure a child away from adult sight. Jonah had described being forced to act as bait, so other kids would trust Silas. Marable described Silas trying to separate children from their friends. Two accounts from different times, different states, yet the behavioral pattern was nearly identical. Sean jotted quickly in his notebook, repeated behavior, consistent targets, young children, especially little girl. What made Marable's statement especially powerful was its independence. She didn't know Jonah, had no connection to the Rowan family, and no motive to fabricate. Everything she said came from personal memory, a memory never publicly shared, impossible to have been influenced by rumor. The overlap in Silas's conduct across two separate eras strongly bolstered Jonah's testimony, while giving Sean an objective confirmation. Silas was not merely a domestic abuser, he was a deliberate predator of children. When Sean asked why she hadn't come forward back in 2006, Marable looked down. She said that when Harper disappeared she was living in another state and only heard vague news reports. I wasn't sure, and I was afraid people would think I was making it up, she said. But when I heard Jonah speak, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. Marable Grant's emergence shifted the entire investigation. Where Silas had previously been a suspect based solely on Jonah's word, he now became a subject with a clear, corroborated pattern of behavior from two separate sources. The details Marable provided aligned perfectly with residence records, known conduct, and the timeline of Silas living near Maple Run, collapsing every point of doubt into a single arrow pointing at one man. By the end of the interview, Sean knew one thing for certain: the investigation was no longer at the suspicion stage. With Jonah's and Marable's statements, combined with Silas's residential history and record of violence, they had crossed a critical threshold, the threshold of certainty. Silas Braddock was no longer just a possibility, he was the center of the entire case. And the truth about what happened in 2006 was now only one more investigative step away. Marable Grant's statement made Silas Braddock's behavioral pattern so clear that he could no longer be treated as merely a potential suspect. Sean Rourke compiled all the evidence gathered: Jonah's testimony, the physical items cadavered from the woods, the 2006 residency records, the history of abusive behavior, Marable's statement, and began drafting the application for an arrest warrant. The file was not conclusive proof of the crime itself, but it was enough to establish that Silas needed to be detained for the purposes of the investigation, especially given that his actions fit the profile of a child predator. The application ran over 100 pages, weaving together fragments of data that had been considered unrelated for years. Finally, a Licking County judge signed the arrest warrant for Silas Braddock on probable cause of kidnapping and endangering a child. This was a breakthrough the Harper Rowan case had never achieved in the previous 14 years. From the most recent residency data, Sean determined that Silas was now living in Mansfield, Ohio. A small house set far back from the road, a sagging wooden fence, knee-high grass in the front yard, the same style as every place Silas had ever lived. He had rented the house only a few months earlier, working a temporary job at a local machine shop. Keeping to himself like a shadow, tactical team was deployed to execute the arrest. As the police vehicles turned onto the dirt road leading to Silas's property, it was still early, but the air was thick with tension. Sean did not join the entry team. He watched from the rear, so he could begin questioning Silas the moment he was in custody. Two officers approached the front door, knocked hard, and announced themselves. No answer. They called out a second time, still silent. When the order to breach was given, the wooden doorframe splintered, and the team poured in. Silas was standing in the living room. He didn't run, didn't fight, just looked at them with an empty stare that was hard to read. His hands were cuffed without a single word of protest. On the ride to the station, Silas remained silent. He didn't ask what was happening, didn't deny anything, didn't show anger, an emptiness that was chilling. Most offenders talk, make excuses, place blame. Silas just stared out the window. expressionless, as if none of it concerned him. When news of Silas Braddock's arrest began reaching Newark, the small city seemed to reel. For 14 years, people had imagined countless faces for Harper's abductor, but the reality was someone most had never even heard of. A stranger who had lived just minutes from Maple Run in 2006, then quietly vanished. Local news outlets ran photos of the rundown Mansfield house, and old fears resurfaced. The perpetrator wasn't a familiar face as many had assumed, but a complete unknown. The Rowan family was officially notified by police before the news spread. When Evelyn heard the name Silas, it felt like the sky was falling. For years she had searched for answers in countless faces, wrong suspects, even people in their own community. Now the answer came from someone no one had ever mentioned the year Harper disappeared. Mark held his wife's hand as she struggled to breathe. In an interview room at the Licking County Sheriff's Office, Silas was placed in a locked room, hands still cuffed. Sean sat across from him, the thick case file on the table. After reading the suspect his rights in full, Sean started with basic questions. Where he lived in 2006, the pickup truck, Jonah, the woods. Silas didn't answer, didn't look Sean in the eye, didn't appear rattled. The next questions about Harper received the same response. His silence wasn't aggressive defiance, it was the silence of someone long accustomed to letting no one inside his mind. A fortified silence, an emotional wall. Sean noted every reaction, unsurprised. Offenders like Silas rarely crack in the first interview. But his silence no longer mattered. The investigation no longer needed his words to move forward. They had Jonah's account, Maribel's statement, evidence from the woods, and a trail of residency record. Enough to dig deeper, enough to expand, enough to force Silas to face the truth. When the interview ended, Sean closed the file and watched Silas being led out of the room without the slightest reaction. At last, after 14 years, the man who had walked away from Maple Run with Harper was in handcuffs. The case had now officially entered the point of no return, the pursuit of the final truth. Immediately after Silas was removed from the interview room, Sean turned to the most critical task, recording Jonah Braddock's full, detailed account. This moment was seen as the key that would unlock the final door of the case, because Jonah was the only person who had ever witnessed what happened on the afternoon Harper disappeared in 2006. In the small interview room, Jonah sat motionless, hands clasped tightly together. He had accused his own father, and now, with the arrest warrant executed, Jonah was holding nothing back. His eyes were tense but clearer than ever when Sean gently said, "Tell me everything in the exact order you remember." Jonah began with that summer afternoon. He said Silas had been unemployed for a while, often angry for no reason, and would disappear for hours without explanation. But on the day Harper went missing, Silas was home and dragged Jonah along when he drove the old pickup around the Maple Run area. Jonah remembered Silas saying he had to take care of something, his voice low but carrying the familiar threat. As the truck crawled along the side street near the Rowan house, Jonah saw a little girl walking along the sidewalk, clutching a doll with blonde hair. Harper never saw them, Silas did. Jonah described his father's expression, calm in a terrifying way, as if he had been waiting for exactly this moment. According to Jonah, Silas stopped the truck a few dozen yards from Harper and told Jonah to stay put inside the cab. He got out and walked toward Harper, using the soft, friendly voice Jonah had heard many times when Silas wanted to seem approachable. Sean wrote down every word, then asked for details about the approach. Jonah explained that Silas had a habit of using a familiar tone, pretending to need help or directions, details that matched prior witness statements about Silas approaching other children. Harper came closer than was safe. Jonah remembered she seemed polite but wary. One tiny moment, Jonah said, changed everything. Silas pointed toward the truck and said something about a lost kitten. Harper hesitated, then took one more step. Jonah was forced to lie down on the seat so he couldn't be seen through the window. During those seconds, he heard the door yank open, the sound of small feet kicking. Silas growling an order. The door slammed shut. Harper was shoved into the back of the cab in a matter of seconds. The pickup left the neighborhood before anyone could get a clear look. Jonah said Harper cried at first, then suddenly went quiet, probably threatened. He wasn't sure what Silas said, but the tone was enough to freeze a 5-year-old in terror. When the truck reached the woods on the edge of Newark, Jonah clearly remembered the shift in the air. He described the location exactly matching the area the forensics team had excavated. A small clearing, soft soil, rarely visited until Silas killed the engine. Pulled Jonah out, then dragged Harper with. Trembling, the boy recounted that Harper only managed to ask, "Where are you taking me?" before her mouth was covered. The timeline reconstruction became crystal clear as Jonah described the exact path Silas took, where he stopped and the spot where he knelt to do something Jonah didn't fully understand at the time. When Sean compared the locations, Jonah sketched with the forensic maps, everything lined up, the slight depression in the ground, the area with rotted rope, the spot where fabric scraps were found. Jonah also described the moment Silas told him to stand at the edge of the clearing and not look back, but he did look back just for a few seconds, and that image had haunted him his whole life. It was the first time he had ever admitted the full truth to anyone. When Sean asked why Jonah hadn't spoken up in 2006, the young man looked down. He said Silas threatened to do the same thing to his mother and little sister if he ever opened his mouth. Silence back then wasn't a choice. It was the only thing keeping the rest of the family alive. Jonah's entire account was recorded, transcribed and turned into a complete timeline. From the moment Harper left her house, to Silas's approach, the abduction, the drive to the woods, and what happened afterward, every link formed a terrifyingly seamless chain. When the recounting ended, Sean looked at the stack of files in front of him and knew the full picture of the 2006 crime had finally been reconstructed. And exactly as he had predicted, this was the piece needed to push the case into its decisive phase. The timeline Jonah provided didn't just clarify the events of 2006, it forced the investigation back into the woods one last time. This time with a target more precise than any search in the past 15 years. Sean Rourke presented the new evidence to the cold case unit, and within the week, an expanded forensics team was mobilized to the exact area Jonah had described. The forest was no longer the same as the day Harper vanished. New trails had formed, trees had grown, and some clearings were almost completely reclaimed by nature. But the spot Jonah marked based on the slope, distance from the trail, and shapes of certain tree trunks matched the area forensics had long suspected, but never had enough justification to dig deeply. The team set up tents, staked the area into grid squares. Specialized tools arrived, ground-penetrating radar, soil probes, and delicate excavation kits designed for decades-old remains. The atmosphere was so heavy that even the sound of metal touching earth rang out clearly. In one grid near the center of the search zone, a probe hit an unusually soft layer. As they dug, the leaf litter parted to reveal the first small bone fragments. A forensic specialist signaled to stop all machinery. From this point only hand tools were used. The soil was brushed away gently, inch by inch, until the skeletal structure of a child emerged. What remained was fragile after 15 years, but enough to show the original burial had been shallow and careless. Beside the remains they recovered a few small items, a faded floral scrap of fabric, the plastic head of the doll Harper had carried that day, and a pale pink button matching the description of the outfit she wore when she disappeared. The entire team fell silent. No one needed to speak to understand they had just found what Newark had both longed for and dreaded facing. Harper Rowan, after 15 years, had been located. All evidence was sealed and transported to the lab. There, experts analyzed the bones, ran DNA tests, compared pediatric dental records, and matched samples against the Rowan family's DNA. Results came back faster than expected, 100% confirmation the remains belonged to Harper Rowan. Missing symptoms. The forensic conclusion was brief, but crushing. It not only confirmed identity but reinforced Jonah's timeline. The shallow grave, time of death matching the window when Silas brought her to the woods, and skeletal trauma consistent with the violence witnesses described. Sean read the report multiple times before calling the Rowan family. This was the call every investigator wants to make for the sake of justice, yet dreads because of the pain it carries. When Evelyn heard Sean's voice on the phone, she stopped breathing. Sean said only one sentence, "We've found Harper." On the other end came a sharp gasp, then choking sobs that formed no words. Mark had to take the phone because Evelyn could barely stand. For 15 years they had lived between fragile hope and utter terror. Now the truth was here, agonizing, but finally clear. The day the team brought Harper's remains back to Newark, the whole town stood still. After more than a decade, The loss was no longer in the gray zone of not knowing. It had become a complete, undeniable for the Rowan family. This was not a happy ending. But at least it was an answer. A place to remember their daughter, a marker where their pain could finally begin to heal. The Harper Rowan case, after 15 years, had entered its final chapter, but the weight of that truth remained, ready to carry the case into the phase of judgment. On the day the Licking County Court opened the trial of Silas Braddock, a thick, heavy layer of clouds hung over Newark, as if carrying the gloom of the past 50. The discovery of Harper's remains had pushed the case into an irreversible phase, and now the full truth had to be laid bare before justice. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, residents who had followed the 2006 disappearance, and the Rowan family seated in the front row. Evelyn held Mark's hand tightly as though afraid she would collapse during the proceedings. The prosecutor stepped forward with a thick case file and images, reconstructing the most complete timeline since Harper vanished. He spoke slowly but powerfully, starting with the child's disappearance, the route she was supposed to take, and witness statements about an old pickup truck. A detail that perfectly matched the exact model Silas owned. Next came the timeline the investigation team had rebuilt from Jonah's account. How Silas approached Harper, got her into the truck, drove into the woods, and what followed. Those descriptions matched the excavated evidence in chilling detail: the floral fabric scraps, the doll's head, the buttons, along with the burial location Jonah had described accurately. After 50, when the prosecutor projected the map of the forest marked with times and locations, the courtroom fell almost silent. A case that had once languished in darkness was now woven into a complete, clear, seamless story that left no room for doubt. The prosecutor's timeline was not just to convict Silas, it was to give Harper back the voice she had lost long ago. Jonah Braddock was called as the main witness. Though he still trembled when he saw his father, he stood straight, his voice quiet but steady. Jonah recounted everything he had told the investigators in the right order, with the right emotions, exactly as it had haunted him for half his life. He did not dodge or soften the brutal memories. His testimony made the air in the room thick, as if every word struck directly at Silas's crime. The defense attorney tried to attack Jonah's memory, questioning its reliability after so many years. But every time the lawyer pressed, Jonah answered consistently, matching the scientifically verified physical evidence. Unable to break him, the defense shifted to discrediting the second witness, Maribel Grant, claiming her testimony was emotional and not directly related to Harper's case. The prosecution immediately countered. Maribel's testimony established Silas's repeated pattern of behavior, from the approach, the threats, to isolating victims. It was not meant to pinpoint the exact time of Harper's abduction, but to prove Silas had a history of targeting children that perfectly fit how Harper was taken. When the forensic lab presented the DNA results, silence blanketed the room. Samples from the forest, the rotted rope, and the fabric scraps all contained DNA traces matching both Jonah and Silas, proving Jonah had been there and Silas had handled the items. Most crucially, Harper's DNA was confirmed at the exact spot Jonah described. The defense began to falter. All their efforts became mere time-wasting questions, with no strong counter-arguments left. Meanwhile, the prosecution simply placed each piece in its proper place until the full picture emerged. When the judge asked Silas if he wished to speak in his own defense or offer any explanation, he only shook his head. Throughout the trial he sat motionless, expressionless, never once looking toward the Rowan family or at Jonah. His silence was as cold as it had been during his first interrogation. After 3 days of trial, the jury left to deliberate. Less than 2 hours later, they returned. Their eyes showed the verdict was unanimous. We find the defendant, Silas Braddock, guilty of kidnapping and first-degree murder of a child. Sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The gavel strike sounded like the entire community's long-held breath finally released. Evelyn broke into tears, not of joy, but of painful release. Mark held his wife tightly, keeping her upright. For them, justice could never make up for what was lost, but at least they no longer had to live in the cruel limbo of the past 50. The people of Newark sat quietly in the courtroom. Some wept, some bowed their heads. In that moment, the truth finally had a place to belong in the sentence handed to Silas Braddock and in the hearts of those who had never stopped searching for Harper Rowan for half their lives. After the verdict against Silas Braddock was announced and the courtroom emptied, the Newark investigators did not leave immediately. They gathered with Sean Rourke in a small meeting room behind the courthouse, spreading out the old case files, many pages yellowed, many reports once dismissed as irrelevant. The prevailing feeling was not pride in closing a cold case, but a heavy sense of everything that had been missed for 15 years. When Harper disappeared, they had focused too heavily on people within the community, especially familiar names like Tristan Cole and Gideon Hale. The narrow investigative direction caused them to overlook the most critical factor: a stranger temporarily staying in the area, a pattern extremely common in child abductions. Had the report of the old pickup been followed up more thoroughly, or temporary residency records in the area been checked more carefully, Silas Braddock's name could have surfaced much sooner. One of the most painful realizations was how the community had treated Tristan Cole. When police briefly considered him a suspect, rumors exploded almost instantly. People avoided him, many families forbade their kids from playing with him, and his family endured years of scrutiny and stigma. Though Tristan was cleared by evidence very early, that truth was never strong enough to extinguish the deeply rooted gossip. In the days after the trial, major Ohio newspapers began publishing analyses highlighting the danger of collective speculation. They pointed out that public pressure had unintentionally slowed the investigation by constantly sending police inaccurate hot tips, from claims of seeing Tristan in the neighborhood at night to baseless conspiracy theories about the Rowan family. Every false report wasted precious verification time during the critical early search days. Many commentaries went deeper. How could a community seen as tight-knit unanimously suspect a teenager with no incriminating evidence? How could fear be strong enough to swallow the truth, blinding them to the real possibility that the perpetrator came from outside? Meanwhile, Newark community organizations treated the Harper case as a vital lesson. Parent groups, school boards, and local emergency responders began revising protocols for missing child responses. Prominent proposals included expanding the suspect pool to strangers from the start, upgrading neighborhood alert systems, increasing support for families of missing children so they are not swept up in toxic rumors, and closer early coordination with forensic units. In those meetings, Tristan Cole's name was repeatedly cited as proof that a community can unintentionally harm its own innocence. The Cole family was finally fully exonerated, but the years of social pressure could never be repaid. After the trial, police publicly read an apology to the Cole family, a belated but necessary act. When the final case reports were completed, Sean wrote a short line on the last page. Harper reminds us not only of the pain, but of the responsibility to do better. It was not just the closing of an investigation file, it was a reminder to all of Newark that justice lies not only in catching the guilty, but in never repeating the mistake. After the trial ended, and the final reports were released, Newark entered a new phase, one where grief gradually gave way to reflection and change. The Harper Rowan case was not only a turning point in Licking County investigative history, it became the foundation for the community to reshape how they protect children. Just weeks after Silas Braddock's sentencing, the Newark City Council officially announced the creation of the Harper Rowan Child Safety Program. The program focused on three main goals: educating children about safety while moving around neighborhoods, increasing vigilance among parents and teachers, and establishing rapid alert systems in case of missing children. The first meetings drew huge crowds, something many officials admitted they had not seen since the 2006 tragedy. The Newark Police Department joined the program, sending representatives to lead sessions on handling missing child reports without wasting critical investigative time. Past mistakes that had sent the Harper case into a dead end were openly analyzed to ensure they would never happen again. What surprised many was the surge of volunteers, from parents to social work students, signing up to help. Harper had become a symbol of a community capable of uniting positively instead of spiraling into suspicion as it once did. For the Rowan family, the first Harper Memorial was held shortly after the case closed. The small ceremony took place in a park near their home, where Harper used to play every afternoon. There were no long speeches, no jostling TV cameras, just family, friends, and neighbors who had lived through the 50s. Evelyn brought the doll that had survived from Harper's childhood and placed it in front of the memorial plaque bearing her daughter's name. The ceremony was not only to mourn Harper, it was a moment for the whole community to confront what had been lost. A child full of future, a family torn apart by pain, and a town once led astray by fear. Yet in the silence of remembrance there was also a strange peace, as if Harper finally had a place to rest, and Newark had a place to begin healing. In the following days, Ohio media reports captured residents talking openly about the case. A veterinarian living near Maple Run said he now paid closer attention to strangers in the neighborhood, something he had never thought to do before. A local store owner shared that she had taught her kids how to memorize license plates, just in case. Those small changes spread powerfully, proof that Newark was no longer the complacent town it had been in 2000. During the cold case unit's internal debrief, the investigators viewed the Harper case as a major milestone. Not only had they cracked a cold case more than a decade old, but it stood as clear evidence of the value of patience, new technology, and the courage of those willing to speak the truth. Like Jonah Braddock, a young officer said this would be the case he would tell every new generation of detectives. Never dismiss any clue, and never give up while there is still a chance for justice. Though Harper had been gone from Newark for a very long time, her loss did not become a bottomless pit of despair. The grieving city found a path forward, learning from the past, correcting mistakes, and building a safer environment for the children growing up there. Newark lost a little girl, but from that loss they discovered what matters most: the value of truth, patience, and the responsibility to protect the smallest and most vulnerable in the community. In today's America, the Harper Rowan story in Newark, Ohio sounds like a true crime podcast script, but it hits the real lives of countless families. A 5-year-old vanishes on the short walk between home and a friend's house. A panicked community hunts for the bad guy and ends up wrongly suspecting a local teenager, Tristan Cole, for years. That detail reminds us that fear can turn into stigma, and when we rush to share rumors on Facebook, Nextdoor, or neighborhood groups, innocent people pay the price. The lesson: if a child goes missing, report what you actually know directly to police. Don't play judge online or in real life. Also in this story, Jonah Braddock, a son abused by his father, finding the courage in 2020 to walk back into the police station and tell everything he witnessed was the key that unlocked the case. After 50, that is very close to America's Me Too movement. The voices of victims and witnesses, even when they come late, can still change everything. If you ever notice something off with kids around you, an adult paying too much attention, a not right situation at a playground, park, or parking lot, don't tell yourself it's probably nothing. Write down the license plate, the time, and call the authorities. The fact that Newark created the Harper Rowan Child Safety Program shows a healthy community is not one where nothing bad happens, but one willing to face its mistakes, apologize publicly, like to the Cole family, change procedures, teach kids safety skills, and accept that justice sometimes takes years. But if everyone stays patient, keeps holding on, and refuses to let truth be buried by rumors, there is still hope. Thank you for joining me on this heartbreaking yet deeply meaningful journey. If you found it worthwhile, please subscribe so you don't miss the next quests for justice. See you in the next video, where we'll keep exploring the profound lessons from cases that changed entire communities.